Pete Ricketts. Governor, very nice to see you. It's been a year since we saw you last time. So a lot has changed in that time. And this is a really big event for Omaha. 40,000 people come. Every hotel is full. Restaurants are packed. What does it mean to have this event going off virtually instead of having everybody there?
Well, of course, we're glad that shareholders will be able to participate virtually and be able to listen to what Warren Buffett's going to have to say. But selfishly, from the state of Nebraska's point of view and from Omaha's point of view, we're very disappointed that those visitors are not going to be here. That literally is millions of dollars of economic loss to the city of Omaha and to the state of Nebraska. So, there's obviously a lot of things have changed during this pandemic, and we certainly understand the reasons for it. And we look forward to being able to host the event again next year.
In the meantime, Governor, we are seeing all different states figure out how they are going to reopen. It's a real patchwork. We're in New York, which is different than what we're seeing in Georgia. Texas getting malls going back on some level soon. Can you tell us what you're doing in Nebraska? What's your timeline and what you're watching?
Yeah, absolutely. So we put in the 10-person rule limit on social gatherings and many of our other restrictions on March 16th when the president made his executive order. And that was really concurrent with, for example, what had happened in New York. And given that we don't have the direct connections to Europe or to China, we have not been nearly so impacted as places like New York. So with those early interventions, we've really kept our curve very flattened. And again, just a reminder, going back 2 months, everything the public health officials said at that time was you can't stop the virus from coming, you can't change the area under the curve, but you can flatten the curve so that you don't overwhelm your healthcare system. And that's what we've been able to do very successfully here in Nebraska. Even in our hotspots, everybody who's needed that hospital bed, that ICU bed, or that ventilator has been able to get one. And we've got tremendous capacity in our hospital systems in our metropolitan areas like Omaha and Lincoln.
And, Governor, we've seen, and obviously the density in terms of geography is different out here on the East Coast than it is out by you. But we've seen states and governors talk about coalitions, regional reopenings, and everyone being on the same page. Have you had conversations with, the governor of Iowa, governor of Kansas about what things might look like when the flow of people does start to loosen up in some ways, not just in your region, but around the country?
Yeah, I think that it's important to note that even within states, you're going to have geographic or regional differences. Certainly, that's the approach we took when we started rolling out our restrictions, and that's the approach we're taking as we start to loosen those restrictions. Having said that, I do have conversations with the governors of other states about what they're doing, and it really is about sharing best practices. Obviously, if you look at our next door neighbor in Iowa, Kim Reynolds and I have a very good working relationship, and so we've been talking a lot about what they are doing, what we're doing to address some of the issues we have, and also on the openings. So we've been somewhat coordinated. But again, even within states like Nebraska, you're doing it regionally. So it's difficult to coordinate that across states when you've got even more regional variations.
Governor, you talked about not having direct connections to Europe or China. One direct connection there is the beef and the meat that comes out of Nebraska. I mean, we have that here in New York. We've got Tyson Foods reporting a COVID-19 cases in Nebraska plants, temporarily closing a beef plant. Can you tell us about the food supply issues in Nebraska and if you're worried about them?
Yeah, absolutely. We're working very hard to not only protect the health and safety of the workers in those food processing facilities, but also to keep them in operation so that we don't risk our food supply chain here in the country. That's what feeds our state, what feeds our nation. And so we are working very hard with companies like Tyson to establish best practices. We've done that through the Global Center for Health Security at the University of Nebraska Medical Center and Nebraska Medicine to establish really best practices. I have weekly calls with the food processors on this, as well as individual calls with them about how they're implementing social distancing, what is admittedly a very difficult environment to be able to do that. You talked about the concentration of people on the East Coast. If you look at states like in Nebraska, you have the same sort of thing around food processing facilities, not only within the plant themselves, but in the communities that serve those plants. Many are non-English speakers as their first language. They are much more densely, have much denser home living accommodations, multiple generations. So you've got a lot of other challenges you have to overcome. It's difficult to social distance at work, and it's so difficult to social distance at home. And so we're trying to address both sides of that equation to be able to protect the health and safety of folks as well as to keep the plants in operation.
Governor, obviously a lot we don't know about what the next couple of weeks look like, let alone the rest of this year. But we've heard a lot of governors and other officials come out and say that the real crunch on their budget that they expect in the year ahead as revenues have been down, sales tax revenue is obviously significantly impacted by all this. What have you been looking at with your team? Do you have any expectations on what your state's budget may look like, what shortfalls you may be facing as you start planning for 2021?
Yeah, certainly we expect to have our budget impacted by the events just because of the slowdown in economic activity and the fact that the federal government moved the tax day from April 15th to July 15th because that moves it out of our fiscal year. Having said that, so far, our sales taxes are down, but not tremendously. We think we'll be able to manage through this. We've got a state that's got strong financial condition, a healthy cash reserve. So we think we'll be able to manage through this downturn like every family in this country has to do by tightening our belts and making decisions about what our spending priorities are going to be.
All right, Governor Pete Ricketts of Nebraska, thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully next year we'll see you in person out there in Omaha. Appreciate you taking the time today.
Hey investors, Zach Guzman here. Are you interested in learning more about the markets and getting the latest financial news? Well, then click right here to subscribe to our Yahoo Finance YouTube channel. Get the latest up-to-the-minute market analysis, big interviews in the world of finance, and information on how to manage your money every day wherever you are.